Um, so, hi everybody, my name is Joey and I'm the Perfect Score Tutor, and today we'll be going over 5 commonly occurring topics on the ACT Science section. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Joey and I've gotten perfect scores on both the SAT and ACT, and I've helped 9 students get perfect scores as well. I've reviewed hundreds of SAT and ACT exams, and today I've gone through all the ACT exams to find out specific content that you need to do on the ACT Science. So before we go into this section, there's just a few things I want to cover about the test itself. So this test is not like any test that you'll see in a science class. For example, it's not going to test bio content per se. It's not going to be like an AP Physics exam. It's going to be its own beast. So what I mean by that is you're going to have to look at charts, data, tables, and analyze the trends that are going on. But occasionally, they also test some outside knowledge. Well, what outside knowledge am I gonna need? Well, that's why I'm here today. So during my class, I do go over the 6 different types of questions that you'll see on the ACT Science section. So if you aren't familiar with that, you can click on the description below, but I'm assuming you know that information already. And then just in general on the ACT Science section, I see that students miss because they don't pay enough attention to detail. And on this science test, I see that students miss a lot of questions, not because they don't know how to take a test, but they don't understand science foundations and they don't pay enough attention to detail. So in just a sec, I'll be going through some actual ACT questions that I've rescued from retired ACT exams. So topic 1, genetics and Punnett squares. I would say that this is a highly occurring one. I see this on about maybe 1 out of every 8 or 9 tests. So there's a over 10% chance I'd say that you'd see something like this. So then you need to know the difference between phenotype and genotype. So phenotype starts with pH, right? So phenotype represents the physical traits that are embodied by a plant or an animal or something like that. And genotype is the genetic marker, also known as the alleles. And then how do dominant traits manifest? So usually dominant traits represent like evolutionary advantage. So think about something that's going to be vibrant in nature. It's going to be big, strong, colorful, tall. So you can easily answer a question like this over here, right? Number 2. It says that P. sativum plant has 1 dominant allele for each of the 4 genotypes. So what will display? Well, between white and purple, purple's the more dominant trait. Between yellow and green, so is green, because that means they're undergoing photosynthesis and are getting a lot of food. Wrinkled and round, I think round makes sense. And then between tall and short, tall demonstrates an evolutionary advantage. So we answered that question in 10 seconds without even looking at the table. So then similarly, how do recessive traits manifest? Those would be the things that are less dominant, right? So for example, albinism, when you are albino and lack either like melanin in your skin or don't have color in your eyes, right? That would be a type of recessive trait. So recessive traits usually occur when you have 2 parents who both have recessive genes and then they each contribute a recessive gene to their offspring. So we can answer a question like number 7 really quickly if we know that white-eyed offspring are the recessive trait, which they indeed are. So which of the following would be the sets of genotypes from their parents? It would be answer choice A, because both the mom, which is XX, and the dad, which is XY, all carry lowercase letters, which represent the recessive trait. We can also do number 8 really quickly too. It says if a white-eyed female has which of the following traits, it would be F, because we know that females carry 2 X genes. So to figure out the other combos, all you gotta do is actually make a Punnett square. So how do we make a Punnett square? Let's look at this example over here. So it says the parents most likely had which of the following genotypes. So for example, I'll take F and I'll show you how to cross them, right? So we can put the mom over here. So one of her genes is here, one of her genes is here, and then the dad will go like this. And then basically we'll take 1 from each side of the box, and so this will be X capital R, X lower r. This will be X capital R, X lower r, and then this will be X lower r with a Y, and then this will be an X lower r with a Y. And of course they have a table over here so you can kind of reference which ones they all are, but just by looking at the table, we could see that all the female offspring would display the dominant trait because they both carry the capital letter. And then all the males carry the lowercase letter, so they would carry the recessive trait. But looking at experiment 3, we see it as a perfect mix. So then how do we get a perfect mix? I think we're going to get a perfect mix with J. So let me try that out and hopefully that'll work. And then so when we do J, we can see that, okay, with the females, there's one with the dominant allele and there's one with both recessive alleles, and then same with the males over here, right? So the only way you could do this question is by knowing how to make a Punnett square. So topic 2 is biology basics. There's just a certain few things that they want you to know when it comes to the biology section. So number 1, DNA can be synonymous with anything with genetic or genes or something like that. Carbohydrates is a synonym of sugar, and then if you need to know specific types of sugars, it'd be like sucrose or glucose or anything that ends with OSE. We have amino acids. I've seen this a lot on the test for whatever reason. Amino acids are a type of protein. And then we also have fats. The biological term for fats is lipids. And then the other thing you do need to know for this test is the difference between genus and species. So then a few questions so you can see what's going on here. So it says, by referring to the observation that DNA is found exclusively in the nucleus, while proteins are found throughout the cell, the scientists supporting the DNA hypothesis implies that genes are made only of DNA because which of the following are also found in the nucleus? So it says proteins are in the cell, right? And we know that proteins and amino acids are synonyms from a second ago. So they're actually both wrong. And then C says gametes. Gametes are sex cells, so cells cannot be found in the nucleus. So then we have chromosomes, right? So here chromosomes are the thing found in the cell. And then over here in number 18, it says, based on scientist 2's discussion, which of the following compounds is involved in the formation of petroleum? So you just need to know some elemental compounds, is that the phrase? I don't know, natural compounds. So CH4 is called a hydrocarbon. That's stuff that makes gas. So CH4 is specifically methane. So that actually can be involved in the formation of petroleum. And there's different types of anes, right? There's propane that you barbecue with, there's butane that you have like the cigarette lighter, and then there's octane. That's the stuff you put in your car. Those are all types of fuels. N2 is nitrogen, that's a gas. In fact, it is the most abundant gas in our atmosphere. And then we have NaCl, which is table salt, and I think everybody knows that. So the correct answer here is F. So then this goes to our genus species thing that I shared with you earlier. So this one asks, which of the following statements about frogs involved in the experiments given is or are consistent with the information in the passage. Passage means you're going to look at the beginning usually. And so we see the tiger frog, and they give the name. Rana is the genus name. And then rugulosa is the species name. So that's how we determine the difference between genus and species. And then what they usually do throughout the rest of the passage is that they'll abbreviate the genus name so they don't have to keep repeating it. So this is the same thing. So they've only used one frog in the experiment, so the correct answer here is C. They both belong to the same genus and species. So topic 3 is acidity. I think this is the most commonly occurring type of concept on the test that all students need to know. So we have this lovely pH scale over here, so you just need to know that pH 7 is neutral, so that'd be things like water. And then anything that is slightly more acidic means it goes down in pH value. So like citrus drinks like lemonade or orange juice, hydrochloric acid, your stomach acid, right? So that they would all have pHs below 7. And then if you have a pH that's greater than 7, that'd be called basic or alkaline. You actually see it at grocery stores when you see the pH 8 or pH 9 water, which by the way doesn't do anything special for you, but that would be basic. So if you want to roast your friends, you could say, hey, you have a pH level greater than 7. So then a really simple question you might see on the test is like, was this acidic, was this basic? I see those all the time, but I included a harder question over here. It says, based on the data in figure 2, which of the following statements best explains why PCO2 affects the pH of blood? So we see here in the graph, we have low PCO2, here we have normal PCO2, and then we have high PCO2. And what's happening? It goes from pH 7.6 to 7.4 to 7.2. So here, even though the pH isn't quite acidic, it is decreasing. So what is happening when CO2 dissolves in blood? It is forming an acid. Forming an acid would lower the pH value. Absorbing the acid would actually do the opposite, and then H and J have nothing to do with the question. So topic number 4, this is also a really, really common one, probably the second most common after pH, but this is thermodynamics. And more specifically, we're going to be talking about the ideal gas law. So for those of you who've taken chemistry, you might call it the Pivnert equation, but we have PV is equal to nRT, right? And then I have all the definitions here. P is pressure, V is volume, N is number of moles. So moles is just kind of a way of counting atoms or counting molecules. So it's just a quantity of something. R is a number that you don't need to know. And then V is volume. So idea 2, what relationships can you infer from this law? So if you have two variables on the same side of the equation, that means they're inversely proportional. If everything else stays the same and we were to increase pressure, that means we would have to decrease volume. So that's what this means over here. Now, if you have two variables that are on opposite sides of the equation, that means they're directly proportional. That means the more pressure that's applied to a system, that would increase the temperature if everything else is kept constant. And then another idea you just need to know, just for reference, it's not super necessary, but room temperature is often measured at 25 degrees Celsius. Sometimes you also have STP, standard temperature and pressure, and that'd be 0 degrees Celsius, but I actually haven't seen that come up as much on the ACT because things are conducted in more normal settings. So we have a couple easy questions that we just need the ideal gas law for. It says, which of the following is a plausible explanation for the change in volume observed for the lead samples listed in Table 1? Well, we don't need to look at Table 1, we just look at the answers. So it says, as the lead samples are heated, that means temperature is going up. The lead samples would move closer together or further apart. So, well, let's think about it. If temperature goes up, I think this is a logical inference that volume also goes up, but we can think back to our PV equals nRT equation, right? And we see that they're on opposite sides of the equation, so they are also directly proportional. So then it's not F or G, right? So they would move further apart and it would cause the sample to increase in volume. Hopefully that makes sense, right? If you heat something up, it expands. If you cool something down, it condenses. So now let's look at 35. It says, suppose the experiment involving O2 had been repeated except at a room temperature of 14 degrees. So what that means is temperature is going down, right? We said a second ago that temperature is standard at 25 degrees. So we've decreased our temperature. And here it's asking about the relationship between temperature and pressure, right? And because they're on opposite sides of the equal sign, we know that they're directly proportional. So as temperature goes down, pressure goes down here. So then the answer would be A, because temperature is directly proportional to pressure. Okay. Topic number 5, we have total mechanical energy. So for those of you who've taken physics, you might understand what this is, but for those of you who haven't, here's my explanation. Total mechanical energy is the sum of potential energy and kinetic energy. So we can write TME is equal to PE plus KE. And if you look at the graph, right, the green part and the red part always add up to the black part. So this is showing you the idea that this E is just the sum of these two. And notice how the value of E doesn't change even though throughout my graph my PE and KE are changing in value. So here's a quick explanation for those of you who don't know the difference between PE and KE. Potential energy is stored energy. So look at this girl, right? She's holding the ball above the ground. It's not moving. The ball has stored energy. As soon as she lets it go, the ball starts moving, right? So potential energy suddenly transforms into kinetic energy, aka the energy of motion. So what formulas are involved? You don't necessarily need to know the formulas, but I'm going to give them to you so you have an idea of the concepts involved. So potential energy, PE, is equal to mgh. M is for mass, G is the acceleration due to gravity, and H is the height. So those are the three things that matter when calculating potential energy. And then kinetic energy is equal to 1/2 mv squared. So kinetic energy only depends on the mass of the object and the velocity or the speed of the object. So then idea number 3 is, what is the relationship between potential and kinetic energy? Well, they're inversely proportional. What does that mean? If you look at this graph here, right, as kinetic energy gets bigger and bigger and bigger, potential energy gets less and less, and vice versa, right? As potential energy gets bigger, kinetic energy decreases. And that's because they add up to the same thing, right? So if you have two quantities adding up to the same final answer, the more of one implies the less of the other. So idea number 4 is the law of the conservation of energy. So what is that saying? It says that the law of conservation of energy states that energy can change forms, but is neither created nor destroyed. In classical mechanics, the sum of the kinetic energy and potential energy of a closed system remains constant. So is energy conserved on the ACT? No. Why? Because on the ACT, they don't use closed systems. In AP Physics, for example, you'll treat the Earth as part of the system. On the ACT, the Earth isn't part of the system. And so because of that, we lose heat to different things like friction, air resistance, heat, sound. So if none of that made any sense, just remember that energy is not conserved on the ACT. So let's look at a few practice questions, so hopefully all this mumbo jumbo makes a little bit more sense. So number 27, it says, what's the relationship between height and potential energy? So as you lift something off the ground, it's going to have more and more stored energy, right? So the correct answer here is going to be B. This is the only one that is directly proportional, right? It's a straight line with a positive slope. 34 over here, it says the results of experiment 1 support the conclusion that as the cart's KE increased, its PE, like I said a second ago, in a closed system, right? The cart is a closed system. KE and PE will be inversely proportional, so as one goes up, the other one goes down. And then number 38, based on student 2's explanation, the block's gravitational potential energy at the highest point on its path most likely equaled. So this is an interesting idea, right? If you send something high up and it is momentarily not moving at its apex or its peak, then its potential energy is the only thing that equals its total mechanical energy. Why? Because if we look at this equation here, right, TME is equal to PE plus KE. If the thing is not moving, then its kinetic energy would be 0. And that's why the answer would be H. So, number 40, potentially the hardest question on the science section. It says, assuming that student 1's explanation is correct, while the block moved, was the TME of the block conserved? So you got to be careful with students. We don't know if students are talking using scientific fact or not, but let's assume the student is talking using scientific fact. Well, in the systems that we measure, they are not closed systems. So typically speaking, TME is not conserved. And which one makes more sense between H and J? It'd probably be J, right? Because the block's kinetic energy and its gravitational potential energy is decreasing, right? That means it's falling and it's also slowing down. And sometimes that happens, right? When you fall down a slide, right? You slow down by the end of the slide. Why? Because you're losing energy to friction. Over here, H says the potential energy remained constant. That would mean that you're slowing down but still staying at the same height, which I guess could be true, but this one, the correct answer was J. And then over here, number 10, it says, as a sphere moved, as described in the passage, a transformation of energy takes place involving the sphere's kinetic energy, the sphere's potential energy due to the Earth's gravity and heat. Which of the following statements best describes this transformation? So let's assume that this ball is falling. If the ball is falling, then GPE, potential energy, would be converted to kinetic energy and heat. So the correct answer is H over here. And what you need to know here is that KE and Q go together, right? You do not have heat when something just has stored energy. So another possible answer could be G. That would be something that's maybe moving up a ramp. So G is a potential answer, but F and J don't even make any sense in the physics world. So here's a bonus question that I found that was extremely tricky. It requires a little bit of outside knowledge from chemistry too. And so we have a helium nucleus that was emitted during alpha decay and an electron during beta decay. And they have the same kinetic energy. I've included the formula here for you. Which of the particles is moving at the higher speed? So what you need to know is you need to know that the helium nucleus is going to have a much bigger mass. So I'll do M up for higher mass. And then the electron is going to have a much lower mass. So students will be like, okay, well the helium atom is a lot bigger, so it has more kinetic energy, right? That's wrong because it says they both have the same kinetic energy. So we could have like 1/2 m1 v1 squared is equal to 1/2 m2 v2 squared, right? If both of these equations are equal and the helium atom has the higher mass, then what does its speed need to do to maintain the equality? This needs to go down. So if the kinetic energy is the same, mass and velocity are inversely proportional. Or you can think about it like this. I have this big, gigantic helium atom and I push it, and I have this tiny little electron atom. That's not a thing. An electron, which is not an atom, it's a piece of an atom. And then I push both of them. Which one's gonna go faster? The electron, because it's really tiny. So then, what's the correct answer here? J, because it is less massive than the helium nucleus. All right, everybody, I went through 5 different topics that are likely to come up on the ACT Science section. I know I went through it pretty quickly, so if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below.